Hey guys, welcome to the Tracy Sandler Show. I am your host, Tracy Sandler. I am here in Palm Beach, Florida from the NFL owners meetings, and I have an awesome conversation with NFL Media's Judy Battista coming up. We talk about diversity practices and NFL hiring. We talk a lot about Deshaun Watson. It is really fantastic. But before we get to that, wanted to give you a bit of an update. Spent some time talking with 49ers general manager John Lynch this morning, and he had a lot to say about Jimmy Garoppolo and where things stand right now with them and the 49ers. The 49ers are prepared to keep him on the roster. He said that conceptually there were conversations about trading him going into the combine. The surgery obviously complicated things. He said there was no offer of 2 second-round picks. He said he has not been telling people that, but the 49ers were prepared and are prepared to keep Jimmy and his $25 million salary on the roster, presumably for now, but they're prepared beyond. He wouldn't get into too many specifics on what it would look like in training camp because there's a lot of time until then, as he said. But right now, he said that Jimmy's contract did not do anything to change what they were doing in free agency. They had a plan. They stuck with their plan. They're very excited for where the team is going to go. But essentially, as of now, Jimmy Garoppolo is a member of the San Francisco 49ers. It does not sound like that'll change anytime soon. As you know, he will be able to throw late June, early July, so essentially in training camp. And that is where things stand for Jimmy Garoppolo and the San Francisco 49ers per our conversation with John Lynch. And with that, let's get into the conversation with Judy Battista. Hello, and welcome to the Tracy Sandler Show. I am here with NFL Media's Judy Battista, and we are coming to you, I was going to say live, even though this won't actually be live, but we are at the beautiful Breakers Hotel in Palm Beach at the NFL owners meetings. We just spoke with a number of AFC coaches. We just had a lovely breakfast. And then, of course, lovely Judy, I grabbed her and I was like, let's record a podcast. And here we are. So much to discuss. I actually want to talk about Deshaun Watson. We're going to get there. But first, I want to talk about you. I was kind of all over the place in the room. You spent a lot of time with Mike Tomlin talking about diversity and hiring in the NFL. And as we know, those practices have not been great. And so I'd love to hear what he had to say.
Well, anybody who knows Mike Tomlin knows he does not hold back, and especially on this topic. First, we asked him about, why did you hire Brian Flores right after he filed a lawsuit against the NFL? And he said, because I was really excited about having a very qualified coach. And I said, were you also concerned about if you didn't hire him, nobody was going to hire him this year after the lawsuit, especially? And he said, well, that may have been on Brian's mind. He said, but mostly I saw an opportunity to add this really quality coach. He later said he also wanted to support Flores. And so when the opportunity arose to hire him, he hired him. I think he didn't want Flores to feel alone in this. More broadly, I asked him, the league is expected to make some announcements at this meeting about things that they might do, maybe an outside committee to look at their hiring practices. And I said, what's your level of optimism that might help? And he says, I don't have a level of optimism that's going to help. So I think Mike Tomlin feels that the NFL has done a lot around the edges, which it has, right? They've done a lot to increase the pipeline. They've done a lot to change the timeline of when you can interview coaches. And I think he thinks something more substantial probably needs to be done because it's just not bearing the results that it needs to bear.
That's 100% true. Does it feel a little bit like, and I hate to use this term, but does it feel a little bit like a Band-Aid? Like we're gonna see if maybe we can fix that there, and we can maybe fix this here. But at the end of the day, a major surgery needs to happen if we're gonna go with this analogy.
And I've talked to other coaches about that. I talked to Ron Rivera about it, and he's got he said for instance, here we are at this meeting where there's coaches and general managers and owners and media, and he said why aren't high-level assistant coaches at this meeting? If you brought minority coaches who are, maybe at the coordinator level, who would, the next natural step would be to be in the head coach mix. He's like, why aren't they here to get face time in a casual, relaxed setting with general managers and owners, the people who do the hiring? He's like, that's a Band-Aid, but it's a little thing that's important because so much of what we hear is owners and general managers hire people they're comfortable with. And the only time many of them see Black coaches is is in the work setting, right? If they employ them, if they're the owners, and maybe they see them in the job interview, which is obviously an extremely high pressure environment. So you never see them in this sort of relaxed, casual, like, let's go have a drink and sit by the pool environment. And that would go a long way, I think, to maybe helping people get comfortable. I don't think it's the answer. I do think like major surgery is probably needed. But they've got to keep trying things. And I think one thing that they were so frustrated by, and Roger Goodell is included in this, is that they've gone backwards. Like somehow it has gotten worse. They've done all this stuff and they've got fewer minority coaches. And that I think is just confounding.
That is confounding. And this was a coaching cycle. There were a number of open positions, a lot of open positions.
And a lot of qualified minority candidates. Like both coordinators in Tampa Bay just won a Super Bowl. Todd Bowles is a former head coach. Neither one of them got a job. Obviously, Brian Flores got fired and then did not get another job. It was a bad cycle.
It was a very bad cycle. It was one of those things that as each coach got hired, there was that kind of sinking feeling of like, this is not going to go the way this should go.
I think there was I was talking to people at the start of the cycle, right after the regular season hits, and there was a lot of optimism because there were so many qualified candidates in the mix and so many openings. So you're like, okay, let's do the math. Like some of these guys are going to get jobs, and then you're right. As each one got filled, you're sort of trying to put the pieces, like project where the next pieces are going to go, and you sort of got this sinking feeling. I think when the Giants hired Brian Daboll, who was eminently qualified, and deserves to be a head coach too, but I think that was a piece that people were like, they didn't make a hire. And there was a sinking feeling, and then I think just outrage and disappointment and like just such frustration in the league.
And there's a part of me that felt like and feels like, well, we're talking about it, and that's going to make a difference, but it's not making a difference. We've been talking about it for a very long time, and to your point that you just said, it's getting worse.
They've gone backwards.
They've gone backwards. So I don't know, and I don't know that anything's going to get solved in the next couple of days, and I don't know what major surgery looks like, but I think it needs to be done. We're just going to stick with this analogy all the way, but I do think it needs to be done. So there's that. We have a lot of serious topics this morning on the Tracy Sandler Show. And this is something that I was able to talk a little bit about a couple weeks ago, but haven't really had an opportunity to talk a lot about on this podcast yet. And that is, of course, Deshaun Watson to the Browns. And we saw the press conference on Friday that I think made all of us very uncomfortable. It made us cringe, men and women alike. But something that I've really been struggling with, and Judy and I talked a little bit about this offline, and I'm really struggling with it as a female reporter who covers the NFL. It is news, and I have to share the news that Deshaun Watson's been traded to the Cleveland Browns for, basically the city of Houston, like for a million things. And I have a problem with it. It's hard because it just makes me uncomfortable. I think, as you can tell by the way that I'm having trouble saying it, it's a little bit icky. It makes me uncomfortable. And the other thing that kind of concerns me is something else that goes on in the league, that, women, protecting women, believing women is not as important. Calvin Ridley has been suspended for a year for betting on games, and I'm not condoning that. That was a bad thing to do. But Deshaun Watson just got well over $200 million in guaranteed money, and I understand criminal charges have not been brought, but 22 women is a lot of women, and when you read the reporting and you really delve into it, it does not look good. And so I just would love to get your thoughts, because you're, of course, similar boat as a female reporter covering this league. And this has been a tough thing in the last couple of weeks. Well, in the last year, really.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. It has been, especially these last few weeks, after the grand jury declined to bring charges, it felt like that was the starting gun on the rate, like literally like within minutes, like all of a sudden there was, so-and-so is going to be interested, they're going to pursue. And it felt like this race, and it was like, whoa, like there are still like 22 women alleging, maybe it doesn't rise in the grand jury's eyes to criminal level activity, but at the very least, incredibly inappropriate behavior. And we don't know the disposition of that. And by the way, the teams don't know the disposition of that either. They're just taking a flyer and keeping their fingers crossed. It was unseemly. It was just so unseemly, this pursuit. And I am not naive. I've covered the NFL for more than 20 years. I understand that the bottom line is to win games, and that is what keeps everybody employed. I get it. I get that Cleveland hasn't had a win in a long, long time. I get it. And I get that Deshaun Watson is, the last time we saw him on the field, top 5 quarterback. He is a fabulous young player. It was icky. It was just, it was gross. And the fact that these teams went all in and were like becoming supplicants, like going to try to woo him, was just, the dynamic was so unsettling to me. And then that Cleveland rewards it with this like unprecedented, literally precedent setting in the NFL, fully guaranteed contract, still not knowing what's going to happen to his supplicants, right? Like, and then when they had the press conference, which was icky in its own right, and I felt for Andrew Berry being up. The owners were not at the press conference, which was a separate matter, but should have been there because as a result, the general manager and head coach had to take all the bullets. But then when they asked, I think it was the very last question of the press conference, they asked Andrew Berry, like, do you believe are you confident that he is innocent? And he did not answer the question yes. Like he did not, he said, well, we're confident that the person Deshaun Watson is like, that's how, I can't remember exactly phrasing, but I distinctly remember he did not say, yes, we believe he's innocent. And I was like, wow, if you can't say that, like, what are we doing here? Like, what's happened here? You know, it was unsettling, and I'm curious to see how it plays out now. We've still got the league investigating and the league discipline. I have absolutely no idea when something might happen and what it might look like, if anything. Deshaun Watson was adamant in that press conference that he was not going to settle. He didn't want to settle. So what happens there? How does that play out? It's just, I thought it was just ugly and unseemly. And I think the reality is, this is harsh, but like, if they win a lot of games, like it will all go away eventually, you know?
Well, you're right. And I think ultimately, and I'm not putting thoughts or words in anyone's mouth, but what came across in the press conference, they don't care if he's innocent or not.
Right.
He's a top 5 quarterback.
Right.
And criminal charges are not going to be brought. I mean, even the way the contract is structured, that really, if it's his base salary the first year is the least amount, so he'd lose the least amount of money if he were to be suspended. I think they don't care, and I don't think that's a stretch to feel that. I can't guarantee that. I can't confirm that, but I think that's, and I think there were a few things to Sean. So you want to say so? I want you to speak.
No, I thought, I think everybody cared if he was going to be criminal charged. Right?
Yes,
I mean that would have been
that
a much different order of magnitude, right? They all waited for that, right? Nobody made a move before that, but then once the gravest threat was removed, I think they all looked at this and like, well, it's a civil case, like you can settle this, or maybe this will disappear, and well, it's not criminal, so maybe it was just, you know, some uncomfortable behavior, but it's not criminal, so it's okay. Like they sort of rationalized it in their head. And let's be honest, we all rationalize stuff in our heads all the time. We all root for people that maybe if you look too deep in their biography, you'd be like, oh, why do I root for this person? So yes, I think to a degree they don't care. But to me, the most, and this is more from a business point of view, the idea that you would cast your franchise with this kind of money at stake. He's the face of the franchise, he's the quarterback, and because he's so young, he's potentially the face of your franchise for a dozen years, 15 years. I mean, if he wins, like theoretically, a dozen years at least, like that you're taking that kind of risk when you don't know if he's going to be held liable in those cases. Like, wow, are you out on a limb there? You know, it's quite a risk. And they were comfortable making it, obviously.
And it's a pattern of behavior, if it's true. So then you're also taking another risk.
Well, you're obviously banking on the idea that this is nothing like this will ever happen again. I mean, God, I for a million reasons, we hope that's true. But
very much hope that's true.
It's certainly there. Counting on that we will never have a discussion like this. I honestly, I was saying this to somebody in the league yesterday. I actually think it will help if the NFL disciplines him, if the NFL suspends him, because then at least there will be some sense of, okay, there was some punishment for the behavior, even if the behavior is not criminal, even if it's just wildly inappropriate behavior, like there will have been some punishment, and that will provide at least some closure. I think part of what unsettles everybody right now is how open it all is. Like it's still all current and nothing's happened. And so I actually think it would benefit, like, it would certainly benefit the league. I don't think it would benefit Deshaun Watson.
I agree.
Like, I go back to, and this is not drawing an equivalent, but I go back to the Michael Vick situation, obviously a much different situation. He served 2 years in a federal prison. And as disgusted as we all were by the dogfighting stuff, and when he went to prison, I thought, like, he will never play in the NFL. Like, it's done. And there was an outcry when the Eagles brought him back, signed him. But first of all, he was very contrite.
He was.
He handled himself quite well. The Eagles handled the situation quite well. And you could point to him and say, he did just serve 2 years. Like, right? Like, what else do you want to do? Like, you know, are we going to give people an opportunity of redemption and second chances? And if you believe that, then at least he served his time. He served a debt to society. And so this would not be the equivalent of an NFL suspension, but at least there would be some sense of, okay, he was punished in some way. There was some discipline. It's been made clear to him that this pattern of behavior cannot possibly be repeated. Then I think that would allow some closure. Maybe.
It might. I mean, at least I think it would be something, because right now it just feels like he's being rewarded.
Yes,
really.
right. That's exactly how it felt.
It's like, okay, you don't have criminal charges, and you're going to be rewarded for your behavior. Exactly. It doesn't matter. And I think that's what is so unsettling. So I agree with you. It's not the same as legal. And I think, you know, going back to Michael Vick, I'm a big dog person. That whole thing was horrifying to me. But our system is that you serve your time and then you do get a second chance. So if that's what we believe, then that's what we believe.
Maybe a more analogous example is Ben Roethlisberger, who now he was not changing teams, obviously. He was still at the Steelers, so he didn't have that element. And he had already won a Super Bowl for the Steelers. So there was already a lot invested that, you know, there was a lot there in that relationship. But, you know, he had allegations of misbehavior with women, and he was never criminally charged. He was suspended by the league. He served the suspension. He was suspended initially by 6, was reduced to 4. He served the suspension. And when they brought him back, you know, the Steelers made clear, obviously, this could never happen again. And, you know, Roethlisberger was pretty contrite and, like, eventually, you know, moved on, right? Like, I know that there are Steelers fans who were never quite fully comfortable with him again after that. Like, always felt a little bit like, you know, I can't believe I'm rooting for this guy. But for the most part, I think people were able to move on because at least he had been punished, and he had said, like, I obviously will never be in this position. I put people in a terrible position. I put my team in a bad position. And so I think if we can get to that point with Deshaun Watson, maybe that'll make it a little bit more palatable. I don't know. It's going to be a while.
Well, you brought something up with Ben Roethlisberger and with Michael Vick. Both were contrite.
Yeah,
and I think that is a huge piece of it. And one of the things for me personally that I found very unsettling, there were a couple of things that Deshaun Watson said that I found upsetting or unsettling. But no, I'm also going to go with upsetting. I actually found them upsetting. When he said, I didn't disrespect any women. There are 22 people who feel that you did. And I understand that he has civil cases, but there has to be a way to say, I never meant to treat anybody with any disrespect. There has to be a way to say, I think he also said, I have no regrets, which is also quite a statement.
I think, I would say, I have not asked anybody about this. My assumption is that he was not prepped by PR people for that. He was prepped by his lawyers, since these are all active cases, and the lawyers clearly do not want him indicating anything that would even could be a suggestion of guilt, since he is not going to admit to anything. And so that's the other piece that he said, like, when they asked him, like, well, if the league, you know, as part of the discipline wants you to go to counseling, would you do that? And he, like, rebuffed that right away, like, well, I don't think I have a problem. I don't have a problem, so I don't do counseling. And so you're just like, like, okay. Again, like, there were a lot of moments in this where, like, okay. Like,
well, I think you bring up a very good point about the lawyers, because I'm sure that there is, because I assume that if he said, I just feel like, yes, that some sort of PR person should have, because there probably was a way to say, without maybe admitting anything, there's a way to say, I do not feel I did anything wrong. I would never intentionally disrespect a woman. I regret people feel that way. If the NFL feels I should go to counseling in a show of good faith
but again, I think,
but he probably can't
I am almost certain that he was prepped for that by lawyers and not by PR people who know how to soften the edges. Like the lawyers are just like deny. Like you can't get anywhere near admitting anything while these cases are still active. So,
which goes back to our earlier thing of all of this. It becomes that, and that's where it gets difficult. And I think that's where. And I also feel for the Browns GM and for the coach and for Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry. And the owners not being there is a terrible look because at the end of the day, you do own the team. That's
it's just ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
And I know when they did a Zoom a few hours after the fact, and they said, well, we had a commitment outside of the country. And I was just like, as somebody in the league said this to me, like, what was more important in that moment than that? Like, like unless you're at like your child's wedding or somebody's funeral, like what?
And then push the press conference
and then move the press. But at the bottom line is don't have the press conference without them. Like if they can't be at the press conference until tomorrow, then you hold the press conference tomorrow. That's okay. It's fine. We'll all be there anyway. It doesn't matter. But like to not have them there and have Drew Berry and Kevin Stefanski, who I believe are all in on Deshaun Watson. I'm not giving them a pass, but like they're not the ultimate decision makers. We know that about the NFL. Ultimately, especially on acquisitions like this, and with this amount of money, it's all the way up to Jimmy and D. To not have them there to face the questions. That was not a good look.
No, it was definitely not a good look. And it's all very unfortunate. So it brings up so many things, to be honest. And I think that becomes a struggle for a lot of us, not just for women, but for men. But I think as women, at the end of the day, we all have battles that only we understand. And I think as our male colleagues and allies understand as much as they can, but they can't totally understand. Like a man will never understand what it's like for a woman to leave a restaurant and walk to her car in a dark parking lot, looking around scared.
Yes.
Like I have my phone open with 911 and like it's just not something.
Well, and I think even to a much lesser extent than that, like they are not as aware of like the power imbalance, and I think that's probably a big part of the Deshaun Watson
Very
case.
Well said.
And so if it's not criminal activity, there's certainly a power imbalance there between employer and employee. And I think most of our male colleagues, including ones who try really hard to understand, I don't think that is immediately evident to them.
No, I agree. No, I think that's true. And it is what it is. And at some point, hopefully that will change down the road. I don't have a ton of hope in that.
I'm not feeling overly confident.
I'm not feeling overly
right
optimistic, but I think that is, I'm just really glad we had this discussion again. It's obviously a little bit hard for me to talk about it because it's just hard to talk about
for everybody. And honestly, I know for some of our male colleagues in the media, it's hard for them to talk about it too. It's just a really
it's just like big elephant in the room.
It's terrible. It's just a very tough topic for everybody.
It really is. So I appreciate you coming on to discuss it. I'm going to let you go shortly, but since we're on this topic now, the acquisition of Deshaun Watson means there is another quarterback in the Cleveland area that needs to be on his way. And there is a quarterback in San Francisco that also there needs to be on his way. So you have our last two, Baker Mayfield and Jimmy Garoppolo, a little bit the last two standing, so to speak. The musical chairs analogy has been used. What happens when the music stops? None of us know. So we don't have a crystal ball, unfortunately, because that would help me so much in life if I did. But we don't have a crystal ball, but it's just, kind of interesting to see how that happens. I might be biased because I've covered the man for a long time. I'd go Jimmy Garoppolo over Baker Mayfield, but that's me. But I just love to hear your thoughts before I let you go.
First of all, the carousel has been berserk. I mean, unbelievable, insane movement of quarterbacks. Jimmy, I don't think there's any question that Jimmy's situation has been complicated by the shoulder surgery.
Absolutely.
Right? I have no doubt Jimmy Garoppolo would have been traded by now had he been healthy, had that not been a factor. But like, for instance, in the case of the Indianapolis Colts, let's take them. I know that they wanted a quarterback who was going to be in there, now when the OTAs start in a few weeks, so that they part of the whole plan, the whole off-season work. So that is obviously a problem. Right? Yeah. Jimmy's not going to be able to throw until training camp, we hope.
Right.
So I think that's the situation there. And I suspect that maybe now they just hold on to him and for a little bit.
I think
see what happens and see how things shake out. Unfortunately, we know there are always injuries once they get on the field, especially once you get into training camp. and preseason games.
And I think that's probably what will happen. It'll be either right before training camp or during training camp at that point. And they restructure the contract. They can keep him for now. It's just, I don't think it's an ideal situation for everybody, for anybody, but it is, it is what it is.
But I think, and then the Baker thing is much more interesting because I don't know where he might land. Because if he were going to land, I suspect he would have landed.
Right.
It doesn't appear that the Panthers, who are needing a quarterback, maybe it doesn't appear they're going there. It doesn't appear Seattle, so maybe that takes a while. Maybe they end up releasing him. I mean, and I think his situation is complicated by a few things. First of all, I think the Instagram and Twitter statement when they were pursuing Deshaun before that happened, we all know Baker is an emotional player, and that spurs him when he plays. He plays like that, for better or worse. But I think that reminded people
it's Baker Mayfield.
Right. Do you want to deal with that? And the other thing is he has a really big contract right now. Right? He's got a big cap number. So if you're doing a trade, you've got to, there's a lot of money involved there. That's not, for a lot of teams, that's a disqualifier. So I think both he and Jimmy have sort of complicated situations. Baker, I'm interested in because you just wonder, when is that going to be settled? I mean, that Cleveland, you don't even have to ask them. They would like to get that wrapped up, right? I'm not trying to be harsh here about Baker, but they would like to get that. They got enough on their plate with the Deshaun Watson thing. I don't think they want to have to deal with that too, and they'd like to just tie that up with a bow and move along. I just don't know how that's going to play out, right? With whom? If you want to trade somebody, you got to have a trading partner, and I'm just not sure where that partner is coming from right now, especially with the draft is only a few weeks away now, so we'll see. That's a complicated situation.
It's definitely a complicated situation. Well, we have this beautiful setting,
I know.
and we had difficult things to talk about it, but I have to say there's no one I would rather talk about these things with you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I have so much respect for you. So I just think these discussions have to be had.
Yes.
And if anything's ever going to change, then they have to be had. So again, major surgery, but we can at least we had the discussion. So thank you for joining me this morning.
My pleasure.
You guys, if you like what you heard, and I know you did, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Follow us on Instagram at Fangirl Sports Network, and we are brought to you by Bet Online. And with that, goodbye from Palm Beach. We're finally here. The top teams in college basketball have been determined, and the Final Four is set. Looking to wager on these games or the national championship? Head over to betonline.ag on your desktop. You guys, I'm going to start that over, believe, because there was noise behind me. We're finally here. The top teams in college basketball have been. We're finally here. The top teams in college basketball have been determined, and the Final Four is set. Looking to wager on these games or the national championship? Head over to betonline.ag on your desktop or your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code BELIEVE to get started. BetOnline remains your #1 spot for all updated odds and info, along with player props and new contests throughout the year. It's the best sport for all your sporting wagering needs, including live betting and everyone's favorite Vegas casino and poker games. It's super easy to get started, so join today. Learn why everyone is saying BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on sports.